What started from the toy shop from the 80s is what turned into pop culture icon for horror and still terrifies us to this day. So, what if I told you that this doll has changed horror forever? Well, I thought today it would be an interesting idea to take a deep dive through the historic existence of Chucky throughout the decades and what made him one of the biggest icons in horror. There is no better way to start than to work our way from the late 80s all the way to where we are right now. In 1988, a legend was created by a group of men named Don Mancini, Tom Holland, and John Lafayette. He was also influenced by the Cabbage Patch Kids, Trilogy of Terror, Magic, Poltergeist, the character of Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the Twilight Zone episode Living Doll. The director Tom Holland has also affirmed that My Buddy dolls play a role in Chucky's design, with the writers having a chance to change the doll's name from Buddy to Chucky to avoid a lawsuit from Hasbro, which is an American multinational toy manufacturing and entertainment company. This movie would become a success and well received by critics and fans while grossing more than $44 million, coming from a $9 million budget. When it came out, it wasn't just a slasher to most people. Audience were shocked by how fresh, clever, and unsettling it was. Brad Dourif's performance as Chucky is something we've never seen before, making Chucky charismatic, funny, and terrifying all at once. So in totality, some people were terrified and some people were purely entertained. One more important thing to note is when creating this masterpiece is how animatronics work and puppeteer were cutting edge for 1988. They combined robotics, camera tricks, and child actors in costumes to make Chucky movements disturbingly real. Critics and audiences praised how believable he looked, especially compared to low-budget effects from most films at the time. So it's fair to say that the practical effects, cinematography, and direction of this film was also groundbreaking. Lastly, people loved the storyline because of how emotionally we were able to connect to Andy and Karen Barkley as a mother/son dynamic. These two paired so well together and made the story feel like more than just a typical slasher by giving it the heart that it needed to be different from all the other films before this. So once we made it to the finale, it was the perfect payoff. Overall, this movie stood out so much, and it not only led to Chucky being the icon that he is, but it also led to being one of the best horror movie franchises of all time. As we just went over in the first movie, we ended up getting 2 more movies to construct this trilogy. I think the representation of Chucky was the perfect example of what his character is supposed to be and what makes him special. Not only do you have the perfect mix of humor and horror, but also a perfect origin story from beginning to end about innocence, corruption from evil, and this idea stems from the toy obsession from the late 80s, but then also at the same time twisting the idea from betrayal from toys, something that kids are supposed to enjoy and have a close connection with, which leads to the iconic storyline between Charles Lee Ray and Andy Barkley. Andy being the innocent kid who was blindsided from betrayal, and this rivalry is something that was never replicated as well then at that point going through the rest of the series. The storyline ended in Chucky's most fatal death of the franchise, something we thought he'd never come back from. Culturally, people at the time saw Chucky as more than just a doll, and he became a sensational horror personality. This era was known as the Tiffany and Chucky era. It had that millennial vibe going from the late 90s to the early 2000s, and horror at the time was treated as a satire. It became very campy with meta commentary due to the rise of Scream completely influencing the genre at the time. The introduction of Jennifer Tilly playing the role of Tiffany gave the franchise an identity that wasn't there before, which was the emotional depth of a killer couple between the two. Together, they became the most iconic horror couple of all time. This is also something that cemented Chucky as a horror icon and pop figure along with the rise of his wife Tiffany. However, this was the downfall of Chucky and the franchise after the disaster that was Seed of Chucky. Despite the success of Bride of Chucky in '98, Seed of Chucky failed to carry on the meta-commentary sequel. It was poorly received by everyone and considered one of the worst horror movies of all time, while nearly killing the franchise. The reception was so bad that Chucky got shipped to DVD for the next movie, and Don Mancini was prevented from using Glenn and Glenda in the next Chucky films later on. So we went nearly a full decade without a Chucky movie, of course. Surprisingly, the next movie would end up saving the franchise. Not only this was a comeback for Chucky himself, it was the return of the old horror that we got from the original Child's Play films with a darker tone, slower pacing, and catastrophic setting. The Curse of Chucky sparked a new era and style that blended well with the type of horror movies that were popular at the time during the early 2010s. This movie also did a great job with tying the story back to the first film, going over more details for Charles Lee Ray's origin story. I think this was a good thing because it keeps everything connected like an actual story of Chucky instead of randomized events unfolding. It gives the movie some kind of purpose, and the story also gives some importance to Nika Pierce's story and character within two movies that she was a part of as the innocent victim, which was a lost art in the franchise since Andy Barclay in the Child's Play trilogy. Even though she isn't the most popular character in the franchise, she definitely left a mark, and her presence and performances was definitely felt. Nonetheless, this era is important because it brought back what made Chucky terrifying in the first place and ultimately saved the franchise. I personally didn't want to cover the reboot from 2019 because it's not the same horror character for those wondering. So, that leads us to present time, and now we're presented with one of the top modern horror shows that aired in 2021 known as the Chucky TV series. Despite many people thinking this will fail, people will praise this show due to long-term storytelling, which brought in nostalgia and an actual payoff from the movies, and also how this show resonates with the current generation. It executes teen drama along with campy stylistic slasher vibes that we usually get from Chucky very well enough to where everyone of all generations can enjoy it, whether you're an older person who grew up from Chucky or whether you're younger within this time known as Gen Z. With each era that Chucky has been a part of in horror is like a time capsule. Every version of him captures what society was afraid of, laughing at, or was struggling to understand. Like in the late 80s, it was the child consumerism of an evil product, or in the late 90s to early 2000s, Bride of Chucky becomes a meta parody while embracing gothic romance, and Seed of Chucky goes over gender roles while making fun of celebrity culture, which is something that wasn't quite popular to do in horror, but was a theme that became a societal norm later on, so it was definitely ahead of its time. Or like in current days within Gen Z culture like we just discussed. Chucky evolved with us, and that's why he never died. And as far as the fans though, people in the beginning were shocked, and kids were scared almost to the point to where parents even fought against the idea of it. And by the time we get to the 90s, Chucky became a mainstream horror legend. You would see tons of merchandise like t-shirts, action figures, and later on even Funko Pop figures, and at this point, instead of fearing him, people were instead cheering him. Especially kids and teens finding him hilarious and entertaining, just like they did with Freddy Krueger at the time. Once we get to the current age, it's the same thing but with more solidification of him being a horror icon because he has the longevity and the proof of reinvention whenever it's necessary. The concept of something harmless turning deadly, like toys, tech, and childhood symbols, is from the success of the idea behind Chucky. Without Chucky, we likely wouldn't have Annabelle, Megan, Dead Silence, or The Boy, some of the quite most popular killer doll movies after Chucky. Even when times hit hard after Seed of Chucky, things ramped up right where they should be, in the mainstream. Most franchises and even horror figures would have just disappeared, but Chucky didn't. It goes to show you how much he means to horror, and his influence is way too powerful to vanish away from the scenes. It is literally quite impossible. Chucky is personally one of my favorite horror villains. He changed the game forever with this iconic portrayal of a character based on humor, like his jokes, and iconic laugh, and the seriousness along with it. And he's a part of the second most consistent franchise of all time, and it's a bunch of films that we always go back to and are consistent within the generation that they were made in. Even the worst movie is still entertaining and still kind of holds up despite the failure it once was. His longevity stands out more than some notable figures. I think the difference between Chucky and the others is being able to push boundaries and explore new themes, but not too much to where it disconnects from the character and story of Chucky. Most villains throughout time are either repetitive with the same formula or are way too different to the point to where there is confusion. But with Chucky, there's a literal balance. It's just proof that Chucky doesn't just evolve through time, he lives on through eternity.